But the man given such a simple burial in Rose Hill Cemetery was far more complex than portrayed by history.
Well, Oswald was a pretty interesting fellow. He's not nearly the one-dimensional character that the Warren Commission has painted him to be. He was in the Marine Corps and did very well. He had a high security clearance. He was stationed over at Sugi. He was a radar operator. In fact, he was one of the guys that would track the U-2 flights over Russia. So it's not like he was the perennial loser that we tend to have this image of him now.
Some of the key pieces of the Oswald puzzle lie not in Dallas, but down in New Orleans, where he spent significant periods of his life. In an unbroadcast interview with a local radio and television station only months before the assassination, Oswald spoke about his life.
I was born in New Orleans in 1939. For a short length of time during my childhood, I lived in Texas and in New York. During my junior high school days, I attended Beauregard Junior High School. I attended that school for 2 years. Then I went to Warren Eastern High School, and I attended that school for over a year. Then my family and I moved to Texas, and I continued my schooling there. Then I entered the United States Marine Corps in 1956. I spent 3 years in the United States Marine Corps, starting out as a private, working my way up through the ranks to the position of buck sergeant, and I served honorably, having been discharged.
He had an honorable discharge, and then just a few weeks later wound up in Russia saying that he was going to renounce his American citizenship. And it's interesting that after he had supposedly said that, he was given a dishonorable discharge from the Marine Corps. It's fascinating that when he did go over to Russia and was introduced to the woman who later became his wife, his Russian was so good that she thought he was a Russian. So we suspect that he was trained. And it is known that the military in this country had training programs for defectors, and we suspect Oswald was in that program. We don't know it, but we suspect it.
A glimpse into his true role in Russia may have been revealed by the hesitant way in which he described his relationship with the American embassy there.
I worked in Russia. I was under the protection of that is to say, I was not under the protection of the American government, but that is, I was at all times considered an American citizen. At no time, as I say, did I renounce my citizenship or attempt to renounce my citizenship, and at no time was I out of contact or with the American embassy.
It's quite possible that his mission in Russia was sponsored by the U.S. State Department, which did participate in some fake defector programs back in those days. It's entirely possible, and it certainly would fit with the kind of person we think Lee Harvey Oswald was.
One person with no illusions about Oswald's role launched his own investigation into the Kennedy assassination in 1967. The former district attorney of New Orleans, Judge Jim Garrison.
He was employed by the Central Intelligence Agency, and it was obviously drawn into a scapegoat situation and made to believe ultimately that he was penetrating the assassination. And then when the time came, they took the scapegoat, the man who thought he was working for the United States government, and killed him real quick. And then the machinery, disinformation machinery started turning, and they started making a villain out of a man who genuinely was probably a hero.
6 months before the assassination, Oswald had taken a mundane job with the Riley Coffee Company, but it seems his real activities were centered a few blocks away. From a small office on the corner of Lafayette and Camp Street, Oswald managed a local chapter of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Operating from an adjoining office was a sinister figure named Guy Bannister.
About Guy Bannister, it's difficult to say much about him because he always stood in the shadows and pushed someone else to the front. He was a strongly disciplined man, perhaps the outgrowth of his many years as a special agent in charge of the Chicago office of the FBI. But he was a key man in the assassination. And that's clear from the fact that Oswald's sheep-dipping, his being portrayed as a communist, was done out of Guy Bannister's office. So he was sheep-dipped for months as a communist by giving literature. Lee, hand this out today. This is your assignment. I came across the fact that Oswald, a private in the Marines, had taken a Russian examination. And I knew the privates did not take Russian examinations unless they were connected with intelligence. So that caused me to be curious about 544 Camp, which was the address stamped on one circular that they gave out one time before, obviously, Bannister told him, Lee, no more addresses. It turned out that was a side address of Guy Bannister's private detective agency. Well, I went down there to look at it, and I found myself not merely outside of Guy Bannister's office, but across the street from Naval Intelligence, across the street from Secret Service. Around the corner was the Crescent City garage, the garage for the intelligence community. And then 2 doors away, the Riley Coffee Company. I used to be in the FBI. I knew people in Naval Intelligence, and they were either across the street, around the corner. The whole intelligence community was there, and right in the middle of it was Guy Bannister, having Oswald sheep dipped as a communist.
You're a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
Most lunchtimes, Oswald would leave work and stroll down Magazine Street to the Crescent City garage, where government agents parked their cars and had them serviced. One such agent was observed contacting Oswald by the owner of the garage, Adrian Alba. During his lunch break, Oswald often sat in this office, browsing through gun magazines and chatting to Mr. Alba, who was also a keen rifleman. Oswald showed particular interest in how to go about ordering guns through the mail. The authorities tried to tie Oswald to the ordering of the assassination weapon by a coupon allegedly found amongst his possessions, torn from a June issue of one of Alba's gun magazines. Oswald, however, had ordered his rifle from a February issue of the magazine.
When the president ends up being assassinated and the scapegoat grabbed by the federal government and killed before anything can be done to help him, turns out to be the man that Guy Bannister has been the tutor of all the time, you have to conclude that Guy Bannister was a key man in the assassination and possibly the most important man that we encountered in our whole investigation. But he's been years, it's a little hard to question.